Welcome to another lecture for 1060 Online. Today what we're going to do, a very important component, especially for our class, writing effective and helpful titles. And again, the title, if you noticed, with essay 1, title is worth at least 5 points for your total essay grade, which of course is the difference between an 85 and a 90 perhaps. So let's always, I always like to ask the question, why the hell are we looking at these topics, right? Why the hell are we focusing on this particular aspect? Well, why title? Well, titles are simple yet important elements for all sorts of objects and documents. And the best kind of aspect is think about this, right? If you don't know who this character is, right, he's Doctor Doom, right? So think of the title for this person, right? Names, names are titles for us. Also, if we have, the difference between Mr. and Doctor, the difference between Captain and Admiral, difference between General and Private, right? So, titles really matter. So think about this, right? The difference between Doctor Doom, right, what that elicits, right, versus if the character was called Mr. Happy, right? It creates automatically an impression, right? And so same thing with kind of essay titles. What you use as your title creates an immediate impression. So names, right? All sorts of things, right? Movies, music, songs, right? Everything has a title for this reason, because it creates an immediate impression. And so there is an important aspect to titling. We shouldn't just treat it as just a phrase that I kind of have to do, right? So another kind of important aspect, and this is kind of a huge debate. Seth Rogen kind of started it, but it's all in the news. Think about this, right? So very popular movie right now, American Sniper, right? And a kind of the run-on joke though that people are kind of using in terms of criticism, right, is army recruitment video, and then think about the kind of implications, right? We have a fictional, well, it's like a movie that's nonfiction. It's based on an autobiography, yet it's still a movie, and so there's all sorts of narrative techniques. And think about just what happens, right, when we think about titles, right? Imagine if it were called Army Recruitment Video, and how different we would have approached this film, right? And so, even though people are kind of making that joke, right, the important aspect is titles matter, right? And would you actually see a movie called Army Recruitment Video versus American Sniper, right? And so again, it's very kind of interesting, and people are making kind of a joke of the movie in a way, but it's important when you look at these jokes, right? Why are they doing that, right? And so there's an element of this movie that, of course, a lot of people are criticizing for as being propaganda-esque, and so it's important when we think about what would happen, right, if we titled it differently, right? American Sniper versus Army Recruitment Video, right? And all the implications that would go into it. And so, titles matter, right? And titles are that, again, first impression of any sort of work, whether it's a song, a person, as I said, with their name. Again, I always joke, I totally want to name my kid basketball, whether it's male or female, it doesn't matter. Imagine if a person were named basketball. Like, how would that work, right? I think basketball Burnson would be a great name. I think that kid would go far. But again, think of celebrity's name when they name their kid Apple, right? How we react to that, whether we think it's stupid or cute. Right? So when we get to obviously the essay, the same kind of rules apply, for academic essays. And of course, the two most important rule is you want to catch the editor's eye, not necessarily the reader's eye, because obviously the editor is the first one who looks at it. So in our case, right, I'm your editor, so you want to kind of catch my eye, right? And you want to help, of course, search engines find your article. And we'll see kind of overuses of these, especially the second kind of technique. But these are kind of in the professional setting. These are the two main reasons why we have a title, right? To catch the editor's eye and to help search engines find your article. And so, questions to consider, right? Does the title express the main idea of the essay? Does the title reflect the thesis? And these two components are key in terms of understanding why the hell we have this phrase, right, in the beginning of any essay. So it's a good use, it's a good exercise in reduction, right? Can you reduce your essay to just a phrase, right? And have something, meaningful, even in that short phrase. And then, of course, you should always reflect the thesis. So it's another way to build up your argument already. Of course, does the title effectively label the essay's content? Will it create reader or researcher interest? Will it move readers into the essay? Are the words short, common, colorful, powerful, specific? you know. And then, most importantly, think about this: would you read an essay with this title? Especially if you're researching the same topic, because we might not always be interested in the topics we're writing about. But, in your research, especially you have to conduct research for essay one, look at how you react to titles, because I guarantee you didn't read essays, or you won't read essays that just seem a little off when it comes to the title, even though when you put the key terms in the search engine, they came up. And so, these kind of questions are very important to ask, right? Would you read an essay with this title? Whether you're interested in the topic or researching the topic. Right? So, structures to consider as well. Use the active voice. And what do I mean by active voice? Standard syntax, standard sentence structure, right? Noun, verb, direct object, subject, verb, direct object kind of sentence. So effective titles usually involve logical sentence structure, active voice, strong present tense verbs, right? As with any good writing, good titles are driven, of course, by good verbs. Use numbers, and this is for MLA, because APA you write out any kind of number, but for MLA, in titles, whether it's 1 or 100, you always just write out the numbers itself. And then this kind of aspect, the subtitle, is important if you have a good sense of humor, or if you have a good clever wit, right? Many authors use two titles to draw in readers that are separated by a colon. So the first title is usually a clever or catchy turn of phrase, while the second title is more specific and straightforward. So sometimes subtitles are good if, again, you have a good comedic wit, if you like telling jokes, and have some sort of way to parody, right, a title. No, APA actually never spells out numbers. APA always uses the numerical, and then MLA uses the numerical after 10, but you have to write out the number in MLA. So that's why the title is a little bit different. In titles, MLA is like APA, where you just use the number. Yeah. So yeah, always pay attention to that. That's an important kind of question. So, as we were kind of discussing right before the lecture, is write everything out. This is very important. Don't get fixated on this title, especially if you have a hard time coming up with the title. It will help the essay, and especially, help your own writing if you choose the right title after the essay's done. A title should reflect the main idea, right, that has emerged, or the main ideas that have emerged. Know the audience too. There is a difference, obviously, between if you're going to write a blog title versus, a newspaper title versus an academic title. So you want to put the writer's self in, that kind of cliched shoes of the reader, right? Think about a title that will entice the specific readers you want to reach. Of course, you want to scan the essay, right? There may be a lot of possible essay titles within the text itself, especially if you just reread it and look at your introduction and conclusion, Also imitate how other titles are made, especially if you have some sort of, parody to be made. Let's say you're talking about like child nutrition, right? Maybe you want to make a pun on the Hunger Games or something like that, right? So it's good to kind of look at how TV titles or movie titles or book titles, try to catch the reader's attention or catch the viewer's attention. Of course, too, review the quotes used in the essay. Quotes can also be used as an essay title, right, as long as it expresses the thought of the essay, right, the argument that you're making. And this will be true for you, and you may know this instinctively, or you may know this, already, is when you're doing research, you pretty much need to know within 5 to 10 seconds if the essay will be important, because a lot of times in your research, you're going to be making all your judgments just based on the title. When you go into those databases, when you go into, Google Scholar, and type in your keywords, right, whatever comes up, you're actually going to be really concerned about, the title. And so this is very important, and it shows why, we want to think about the title and not just kind of think about it as a throwaway phrase, right, that starts the essay off. And so a couple of things you want to consider, right? So contrary to previous steps, you must also remember that titles should be carefully done, right? So here are some mistakes you want to avoid. Long titles. Now, essays should be concise, and same thing with the titles. Titles should be concise. Long or short titles are fine so long as they're informative and catchy. You don't want to just make it long for the sake of being long. This is also not the opportunity to show off your vocabulary. What you want to do is eliminate unnecessary and difficult terms, right? The goal of a title is to express the thoughts of the essay, not to impress the reader. So try to make, again, a title that is understood by all. Again, subtitles, if you're not funny, if you just don't have a good, wit or sense of humor, don't use it, right? Many times people will try to be overly clever and have a joke or pun in the subtitle, but again, if they're not funny, you should just have one title. Think about it: teachers who tried to make a joke and just were bad at it. Think of parents who try to, use sense of humor, but they're just bad at it, right? If you are funny, don't be afraid to be clever, and if you're not funny, don't worry about it. Be very straightforward, right? That's okay. And so what you want to pay attention to is just make sure you don't have a boring title, right? Don't say something like let me think, speed racing is good, right? Say something more meaningful. So enhance an essay title by writing again a catchy phrase or a quote followed by a colon sometimes. And then of course offensive titles, right? We're not out to shock people. So, as much as possible, use decent words right in the title. Avoid profanity and obscenity in the essay's title, unless you have a specific reason for it, right? If there's a reason why you want to use it. And again, same thing with any kind of essay. You should always have a good reason why you're doing any sort of word choice and diction, right? So you always want to have a game plan. So, just to conclude, right? The title is another piece to help introduce your essay and your particular perspective. It matters, and again, when you're researching, you will realize how vital that title is if you're not aware of this already. It is again a helpful tool for readers to determine what value your essay contains. Again, that 5 to 10 second span is very crucial when you think about it. Is when you're conducting your own research, you will be reading a lot of titles, but you won't be reading a lot of essays because that takes up your time. And so the title is very crucial to the research process. And then, of course, lastly, it also provides just a good exercise for you to think about how to reduce your essay, right? Think about how concise summaries you could use of your work, right? Because basically the title is just a phrase of a larger work. So even when you write a 12-page paper, right, your title should still have this kind of concise overview of that argument. And that's a very kind of important intellectual exercise, right? To be able to reduce a large work into a very simple phrase that still effectively communicates what you're trying to argue. So, obviously, if you have any questions, always email, and in a moment we'll look at examples of good titles and bad titles, and look at a few titles here, right? So, think about this, right? So, and all these you could find in JSTOR and through other academic websites. So these are academically published articles. So what do people think about this? Social hierarchy and the death penalty, a social dominance perspective. And so again, this title represents really a good academic essay title. Even though it's using a few, as I said, a few kind of field terms, right? Social dominance, social hierarchy. We know what it's about, right? We know that it's looking at the death penalty in this interpretation of, social class or even race, perhaps, right? So let's look at this, right? Freshman comp. What is this shit? This title, again, has a good sense of humor to it. So you would expect that the essay itself too will examine the problems of a composition course, but not in just a very bland, straightforward way. So I think this title also helps with something that we haven't talked about in a lecture is tone, right? Imagine when you read this essay, imagine if the essay is going to be completely jargon driven, right? It would be unsuccessful. Because what the title does is sets up the tone, where the first essay, right, typically there's not going to be any kind of sense of humor to it, right? Because based on the title, it's very straightforward, very dense with the jargon. But in the second one, right, it seems more lighthearted. And so another aspect of the title, too, is to set up tone. So, I would argue that it is an effective title. It is broad, though, as we mentioned, because that's an important criticism too, and I'm glad you mentioned that. It is broad. We're not quite sure if it's going to cover one aspect of why the class maybe fails or numerous aspects, but you could see why, as you argued, the editor definitely had a feeling that, oh, young people are going to like this, people are going to find it provocative, right? So I think that's an important title, and why that exists, right? And here's another one. Alien and Femininity, Speculative Fiction and Feminist Theory, and Mind in Motion, The Fiction of Philip K. Dick. So what is this article talking about? What is this title talking about, right? Too many concepts, right? Alien femininity, speculative fiction, feminist theory, mind in motion, the fiction of Philip K. Dick. And so what could we do is just reduce this, right? And so if you have any questions